You ever sit in a room and just feel like something's off? Like the air is heavy, the tension is thick, and you just know something bad is about to go down? That was me sitting in a law office at my father's will reading. The moment I walked into that law office, I knew something was off. The air was heavy, like a storm was about to hit. I wasn't expecting much from my father's will reading. Our relationship had been complicated at best. I was there out of respect, nothing more. But when I sat down at the long mahogany table, my cousin Derek was already there, lounging back like he owned the place. His suit was custom, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, and on his wrist, a watch that screamed I just got rich overnight. That was my first red flag. Derek had never had money. Then, as the lawyer prepared to read the will, Derek leaned forward with a smirk and let out a chuckle. "Man, I was wondering when you'd find out," he said, shaking his head. "I already took the money. Spent it, actually. So, good luck with that." I felt my stomach drop. Wait, what? I turned to the lawyer, expecting some kind of reaction, but Mr. Grant didn't even blink. Instead, he calmly reached into his briefcase, pulled out a thick folder, and slid it across the table toward Derek. "Actually," he said, his voice smooth and controlled, "you might want to read this first." And just like that, the smirk disappeared from Derek's face. He hesitated before opening the folder, his fingers trembling slightly. As his eyes scanned the first page, the blood drained from his face. He flipped to the second page, then the third. His breathing became uneven. No, this isn't real," he muttered under his breath. But it was real. See, my father wasn't stupid. He knew Derek would try to take the money early. So he set a trap. The inheritance Derek had received? It wasn't real. It was a dummy trust designed to test him. And Derek? That arrogant fool walked right into it without ever reading the fine print. I watched as Derek's hands began to shake. The reality was sinking in. He hadn't inherited anything. In fact, by touching that money, he had triggered a clause that completely disinherited him from my father's real estate, assets, and fortune. He wasn't just broke. He was about to lose everything. At that moment, I just sat back and watched as karma did its thing. Derek had played himself, and the best part? He had no one to blame but himself. But trust me, this was just the beginning. Because Derek? He wasn't going down without a fight. And what happened next? Oh, you're not ready for the chaos that followed. Derek sat there frozen, gripping the folder so tightly his knuckles turned white. The smug confidence he had just moments ago? Gone. Completely wiped off his face. He kept flipping through the pages, like reading them over and over would somehow change the words in front of him. His lips parted, but no words came out. He looked up at Mr. Grant, searching, begging, for some kind of explanation, some way out. But the lawyer simply adjusted his glasses and gave a polite, almost amused smile. "Mr. Porter suspected you might try something like this," Mr. Grant said, his voice impossibly calm, like this was just another routine Tuesday for him. "So he made sure you were taken care of, just not in the way you expected." Derek's breath was shaky. He flipped another page, his fingers trembling now. "No. This has to be a mistake," he stammered. "I already got the inheritance. I spent it." "You can't just," Mr. Grant cut him off before he could finish. "Actually," he said, reaching into his briefcase, "we can." He pulled out another document and slid it across the table like a final nail in Derek's coffin. "That's a court order freezing all remaining assets linked to the trust you accessed." Derek blinked. His mouth opened, then closed. "And as per the conditions of that trust," Mr. Grant continued, "you are now legally responsible for repaying every cent you took." Derek let out a short, choked laugh, like his brain hadn't quite caught up to the disaster unfolding in front of him. I can't," he finally whispered. "There's nothing left." Mr. Grant barely even blinked. "That's unfortunate," he said, his tone still completely neutral, almost bored. "Because the law firm is fully prepared to pursue this matter in court. Your uncle made sure of it." I couldn't stop the slow, satisfied smirk from creeping across my face. "So let me get this straight," I said, leaning forward just enough to make sure Derek could feel the weight of the moment. "The money Derek took wasn't even real? And now he owes every penny back." Correct, Mr. Grant said with a small nod, like we were just discussing the weather. Derek exhaled sharply. His face was drained of all color now. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a bridge that was already burning behind him. But I bought a house, he stammered. A car. I invested it. You can't just. Mr. Grant didn't even let him finish. All assets purchased with the trust's money will be liquidated to cover your debt, he said, flipping over the next page of legal documents. You won't have a dime left. Derek's hands curled into fists. He was breathing heavily now, like he was trying to process the fact that his entire life had just been ripped away in a matter of minutes. He had spent months living like a king, throwing money around like it was endless, believing he had won. Now, he was nothing. I sat back in my chair watching as Derek spiraled, watching as the reality of his situation finally sank in. He had played the game, thought he had outsmarted everyone, thought he had walked away a winner. But what he hadn't realized, he had been playing against someone 10 steps ahead the whole time. And if you think Derek took this loss gracefully, you'd be dead wrong. Because the second he realized there was no way out, he snapped. And what happened next? Let's just say things went from bad to so much worse. Derek sat there, gripping the folder like it might disappear if he let go. His face was drained of color, his breath unsteady. He kept flipping the pages, rereading the same lines, hoping the words would change. They didn't. He looked up at Mr. Grant, his voice shaky. This can't be real, he whispered, but Mr. Grant didn't flinch. Oh, it's very real, Mr. Derek, he said smoothly. You accessed a trust you had no right to. You violated its terms. And now, by legal definition, you owe every cent back. Derek let out a dry laugh, shaking his head as if he could will this nightmare away. No. You can't just take everything from me. That's not how this works. Mr. Grant sighed and slid another document across the table. Actually, it is. That is a court order freezing all assets tied to the stolen trust. Derek's hands clenched into fists. I spent that money. It's gone, he snapped, his voice rising in panic. I bought a house. Car. I invested it. You can't just. Mr. Grant cut him off with a polite but firm nod. All assets acquired through the fraudulent trust will be seized. Everything linked to that money is no longer yours. Derek's whole body tensed. His fingers twitched like he wanted to throw the folder across the room. This is fraud. This is a scam. You think you can just ruin me like this? His eyes flicked to me, filled with rage. You set me up. This was all part of your plan, wasn't it? I just smiled. Derek, you did this to yourself. He pushed back his chair so fast it nearly toppled over. His face was twisted with fury. You think this is over? His voice was low, dangerous. You think I don't have options? Mr. Grant barely reacted, but I saw the way his fingers curled just slightly around his briefcase. I suggest you reconsider your words, Mr. Derek, he said coolly. Because if you think you're in trouble now, just wait until the courts get involved. Derek's nostrils flared, his entire body shaking with rage. Then, just as quickly as his temper flared, something shifted in his eyes. He exhaled sharply, forcing a smirk. Fine, he said, voice eerily calm. You want to play hardball? Let's play. He grabbed the folder, tucked it under his arm, and stormed out of the office without another word. The room fell silent for a moment. Mr. Grant adjusted his glasses and sighed. That went about as expected, he said, looking at me. Are you prepared for what comes next? I frowned. What do you mean? He closed his briefcase. Derek's desperate. And desperate men do reckless things. Be ready. I nodded, a cold chill settling in my spine. I had won this round, but something told me Derek wasn't done. And I was right. Because 3 days later, he disappeared. 3 days passed. No calls. No emails. No sign of Derek anywhere. At first, I thought maybe he was just laying low, licking his wounds, trying to figure out his next move. But then my phone rang. It was Mr. Grant. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. We have a problem, he said. My stomach dropped. What kind of problem? The kind that involves fraudulent passports and an attempted escape. I sat up straight. You're kidding. I wish I was, Mr. Grant sighed. Derek bought a one-way ticket to Argentina. He's trying to run. I felt a slow burn of rage settle in my chest. Of course he was. Derek wasn't the type to accept consequences. He was the kind of guy who would rather fake his own death than own up to his mistakes. Did he make it? I asked, almost not wanting to know the answer. There was a pause, then the faintest chuckle from the other end of the line. No. He got caught at the airport. I nearly fell off my chair laughing. I could picture it now. Derek standing there at the customs checkpoint trying to play it cool while TSA ran his fake passport under a scanner. Maybe for a second he thought he was in the clear. And then, the moment of realization when they pulled him aside. The way his confidence would have crumbled. You're telling me this idiot really tried to flee the country while under active investigation? I asked between laughs. Not only that, Mr. Grant said, and I could practically hear the smirk in his voice. But he was carrying a suitcase full of cash and wearing that ridiculous watch he bought with the trust's money. I shook my head, grinning. So what now? Well, Mr. Grant said, now he's in custody. And given his new attempt at fraud, I'd say his legal troubles just got a whole lot worse. I leaned back in my chair, letting that sink in. Derek had thought he could cheat the system just like he always had. He thought he could steal, lie, manipulate his way out of the hole he dug. But this time, he wasn't getting away. The system had caught up to him. Karma had caught up to him. And now, he was well and truly screwed. But here's the thing. I thought this was the end. I thought Derek getting arrested was finally the conclusion to this disaster. But I was wrong. Because 6 months later I got a letter. No email. No phone call. An actual handwritten letter. And when I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was short. Just one sentence. You think this is over? I have friends. You took everything from me. Now I'm taking something from you. No signature. No return address. Just a chilling, unmistakable warning. And that's when I realized Derek might have been behind bars. But he wasn't done with me yet. For a moment I just stared at the letter. My hands felt cold, my heartbeat steady but loud. Derek was locked up. He had nothing. No money, no power, no way to touch me. And yet, here I was, holding proof that he still had connections. I could have brushed it off as an empty threat. But something about it felt wrong. I didn't sleep well that night. I double-checked my locks, kept the lights on, even left a bat next to my bed just in case. Call me paranoid, but something in my gut told me this wasn't over. And then, at exactly 3:14 a.m., my security system blared. The piercing alarm yanked me out of sleep so fast that for a second, I wasn't even sure if I was dreaming. I stumbled out of bed, my heart pounding, grabbed my phone and checked the cameras. The motion sensors had been tripped. Someone was outside. I rushed to the front door, but by the time I got there, the intruder was gone. No broken windows. No forced entry. Nothing stolen. But when I looked down, I saw it. A single playing card taped to my front door. A joker. That's when I knew. This wasn't random. This wasn't some bored kid messing around. This was Derek. Or, more accurately, whoever was still working for him. I called the cops. They took it seriously at first, but when they saw nothing was stolen, just a card left behind, their interest faded. Probably just some prank, the officer said, shrugging as he took notes. You sure you don't have any enemies? I almost laughed. If only he knew. The next morning, I walked straight into Mr. Grant's office and slammed the letter onto his desk. This isn't possible, I said. Derek is in prison. Mr. Grant picked up the letter and read it, his expression unreadable. Then he let out a slow breath and nodded. He is. But that doesn't mean he's powerless. I frowned. What does that mean? Mr. Grant leaned back, his fingers steepled. Derek wasn't exactly a criminal mastermind, but he was connected, small-time criminals, shady business partners, people who owed him favors. If he called in a debt before getting locked up, it's very possible someone out here is carrying out his orders. That sent a chill down my spine. I had been so focused on taking down Derek that I didn't stop to consider who else might be in his orbit. Mr. Grant looked at me seriously. If he's got people on the outside, this isn't over. You need to be careful. I exhaled sharply, forcing myself to stay calm. Derek wanted a war? Fine. He was about to get one. And I was going to finish this once and for all. If Derek thought I was just going to sit back and wait for whatever came next, he had seriously underestimated me. I wasn't about to play defense. If he had people working for him on the outside, I needed to find out who they were and shut them down before things escalated. So, I did what my father would have done. I went on the offensive. I hired a private investigator, someone who didn't ask too many questions and got results fast. His name was Henderson. Ex-cop. No nonsense. When I told him about Derek, the letter, the Joker card, he just nodded and said, "Give me 2 weeks." He only needed 10 days. When he came back, he laid out everything on my desk. Turns out, Derek still had 3 key people running his dirty work from the outside. First, Victor Cole, a former accountant who helped him launder stolen money. Smart but spineless. He wasn't a physical threat, but he knew how to move money and cover tracks. Second, Ray Bones Martinez. Muscle for hire. Violent. A guy you did not want showing up at your door. If anyone was behind the break-in attempt, it was him. And third, Samantha Price. Derek's ex-girlfriend. And if Henderson was right, she was the real mastermind behind Derek's last-minute moves. Unlike Derek, she wasn't reckless, she was patient, calculated. The kind of person who played the long game. Henderson leaned back in his chair. These people? They don't scare easy. And they don't back down. I clenched my jaw. Neither do I. It was time to set a trap. I made it look like I was about to move a large sum of money, millions, into a single vulnerable account. A little bait to see if anyone bit. And I made sure the right people heard about it. 3 days later, Samantha walked right into it. She showed up at the bank, trying to withdraw money using forged documents. What she didn't know. The account was flagged. The second she handed over that paperwork, alarms went. She was arrested on the spot. And the moment Samantha cracked, it was over for the rest of them. She flipped fast, giving up everything, Victor, Ray, their entire operation. Turns out, Derek had been orchestrating everything from prison using a smuggled phone. He had plans written out, notes on hitting my accounts, my house, even my family. That was all the court needed. Victor? Arrested for fraud and tax evasion. Ray? Picked up on weapons charges and outstanding warrants. And Derek? That was the final nail in his coffin. His original 15-year sentence? Now it was 35 years. No parole. And me? I was finally free. Or at least that's what I thought. Because Derek? He still had one last move left. And trust me, you won't believe what it was. I thought it was over. Derek was done. His operation was dismantled, his allies had flipped, and his prison sentence had more than doubled. There was nothing left for him to fight for. No money, no connections, no way out. And yet, somehow, he still wasn't finished. It started with a letter from his lawyer. A high-priced, sleazy attorney who made a living getting criminals off the hook. The letter was simple, direct, and so laughably desperate that I had to read it twice just to make sure I wasn't imagining things. Derek was suing me. For damages. The man who stole from my father. Who spent my inheritance. Who tried to ruin my life. Now he was playing the victim, claiming emotional distress, defamation, and unlawful entrapment. I stared at the letter for a full minute before bursting out laughing. Derek was broke, imprisoned, and completely powerless, but somehow in his delusional mind he still thought he could manipulate his way out of this. Mr. Grant barely looked surprised when I handed him the letter. He skimmed it, sighed, then placed it down. "This is pathetic," he muttered. I crossed my arms. "Can he actually do this?" "Oh, he can try," Mr. Grant said, "but it won't get far. No judge is going to side with a convicted felon who is serving 35 years for fraud. That should have been the end of it. But Derek being Derek, he pushed forward anyway, wasting what little money he had left on legal fees, clinging to the idea that he could still win. And that's when I decided I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to end this. Because Derek hadn't just stolen money. He had stolen time. He had dragged me through legal battles, forced me to live in fear, sent people after me. He had made my life hell. And now, I was about to return the favor. I countersued. For everything. Fraud. Emotional distress. Defamation. I wasn't just asking for a dismissal. I was demanding compensation for every single thing Derek had put me through. And when the case went to court, it wasn't even close. The judge took one look at Derek's criminal record, the evidence against him, the absolute circus of his lawsuit, and threw his case out on the spot. But my countersuit? That went through. The ruling was brutal. Every last cent Derek had left, every future dollar he might make, even his prison wages, they all legally belonged to me. He was broke before. Now, he was in debt to me for the rest of his miserable life. And just to make sure he really understood that, I sent him a final letter. It was short. Now you work for me. Enjoy the next 35 years. He never wrote back. But something told me he read that letter over and over again, realizing, for the first time in his life, that he had truly, completely lost. And I had finally won. Or so I thought. Because 6 months later I got another letter. And this time, it wasn't from Derek. 6 months passed. No drama. No court hearings. No threats. For the first time in years, my life finally felt normal. No lawyers, no lawsuits, no looking over my shoulder. Derek was exactly where he deserved to be, rotting in a cell, forgotten. Then the letter arrived. Unlike the ones before, it wasn't from Derek. No prison stamp. No lawyer's name attached. Just an unmarked envelope, handwritten address. Something about it felt off before I even opened it. And when I did, my stomach dropped. You made a mistake. Derek wasn't the only one. No signature. No explanation. Just those 8 words, written in shaky, almost frantic handwriting. I read it again. And again. My hands clenched around the paper. My heart beat steady but loud. This wasn't Derek. He had no power left. But someone else was still out there. I grabbed my phone and called Mr. Grant. He picked up immediately. You need to come in, I said. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from him, the letter on his desk. He read it once, then leaned back, his face unreadable. Thoughts? I asked. He tapped the letter with his fingers, deep in thought. Derek had people. Even after Samantha, Victor, and Ray were arrested, it's possible there were others we never knew about. He exhaled sharply. Whoever sent this, they're not done with you. That last sentence sent a chill down my spine. For the first time in months, I felt that old tension creeping back in. The paranoia. The unease. The feeling that someone, somewhere was watching, waiting. I wasn't going to sit back and wait for them to make the first move. So I went looking. It didn't take long to find him. The last loose end. His name was Ethan Blake. Small-time con artist. Ran in the same circles as Derek. Had a history of forging documents, moving stolen money, and more importantly, he was never caught. I had spent so much time focused on Derek, I hadn't even thought to check for who else might have been pulling the strings. But now, I had a name, a face, a target. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the file Henderson had pulled on Ethan. If he thought he could threaten me, he had no idea what was coming. Ethan Blake. A name I hadn't heard before, but one I wouldn't forget. He was smart, smarter than Derek at least. He had kept his hands clean enough to avoid getting caught when everything collapsed. He wasn't flashy, didn't make stupid moves like buying luxury watches with stolen money. But he was involved, and now he had made his first mistake. He let me know he existed. I wasn't about to play defense. If Ethan wanted a war, I was bringing it straight to him. I had Henderson dig deeper. Turns out Ethan had been Derek's real safety. Nah. While Derek was busy flaunting his fake wealth, Ethan was the one moving the money, covering the tracks, making sure the whole operation didn't fall apart. But when Derek got himself arrested, Ethan didn't step in. He went dark, probably thinking he could wait it out. But now, he was making a move. I needed to make one first. I had one advantage. Ethan was careful, but he had a weakness. Money. He wasn't a fighter, not like Ray. He wasn't a manipulator, not like Samantha. He was just a guy who had always stayed one step ahead. And all I had to do was give him the illusion of one last payday. So I set a trap. I leaked a bit of false information through some old contacts. Word that Derek had stashed away one last hidden account before he was arrested. Millions supposedly untouched. All Ethan had to do? Step out of the shadows and claim it. It took 4 days. Henderson called me early in the morning. He said. Ethan had booked a flight out of state, heading straight for a bank where he thought the fake account was set up. He had walked right into my hands. I made one call. By the time Ethan stepped into that bank, the authorities were already waiting. Fraud. Identity theft. Wire fraud. Conspiracy to commit financial crimes. The charges stacked up fast. And just like that, Derek's last lifeline was cut. 2 days later, I got a final call from Mr. Grant. Ethan took a deal, he said, his voice almost casual. Turned over every document, every email, every transaction. I already knew what was coming. Did he give up Derek? I asked. Mr. Grant chuckled. Oh, he didn't just give up Derek. He gave up everything. Every scam. Every stolen dollar. Everything he knew about how Derek operated. And that was it. The last loose end was tied up. For the first time in years, I could finally breathe. But before I could move on, I had one last thing to do. Ethan's confession was the last nail in the coffin. There was no more wiggle room, no more appeals, no more hidden cards to play. The court extended Derek's sentence, 45 years. No parole. No way out. That should have been enough. But I wasn't done yet. See, Derek had spent his whole life believing he could manipulate, lie, and steal his way to the top. He had no sense of consequences, no understanding of what it meant to truly lose. He always thought he could talk his way out of anything. But not this time. So I wrote him a letter. The last one. I kept it short. Checkmate. I didn't expect a response. I didn't want one. But something told me that Derek, sitting alone in his prison cell, would read that word over and over again and know, with absolute certainty, that I had taken everything from him. And I'd be lying if I said that thought didn't feel good. After that, I moved on. My father's estate was officially mine. The money, the business, everything Derek had tried to take, it all belonged to me. But more than that, I finally had peace. No more threats. No more paranoia. No more looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next betrayal. Derek was a ghost. Just another forgotten inmate lost in the system. And me? I was free. They say karma always catches up, but most people don't get to watch it happen in real time. I did. And let me tell you, it was beautiful. Derek spent his whole life thinking money made him untouchable. That if he had enough, he could cheat, steal, and lie. His way through life without consequences. But in the end, he had nothing. No money. No power. No friends. And me? I didn't just take back what was mine. I made sure he paid for every second he tried to take from me. And that's the real victory. If you were in my position, would you have done the same? Would you have gone all the way, or would you have let Derek crash and burn on his own? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear what you would have done. And if you stuck with me till the end, you just witnessed karma at its finest. Thanks for watching. Until next time.